Good morning, all. It is January 10, and this is our Speech 110 class covering chapters 6 and 8. Please remember, you'll have a short quiz at the end of class today. So take some notes, and if you have any questions as we move through the class, please feel free to ask those. I hope that you will also all participate. Some of you are doing a really great job of participating. Some of you have been a little bit quieter than the others. And you want to try and do that because remember, your participation grade is a huge portion of your grade in this class. It's 20% of your whole grade in the class. Just coming to class, being on time, and participating. So make sure you do that. The other way you build your participation credit is through one of your homework assignments tonight, and that's the discussion forum feature. For the discussion forum feature, you're asked to watch your classmates' speeches and offer 2 comments, at least 1 to positive and 1 suggestion. And read the other comments that your classmates have left and try not to duplicate any because you don't get credit if it's the same comment. So just make sure that you do that and you watch the speeches and you're ready to talk about them tomorrow in class. We'll lead with the person who is assigned to respond to a speech, and then anyone else that may have a comment that would add to the learning process may add those as we move through. I'll make my comments after students have made comments on everyone's speeches. And that's one of the big ways we learn in this class. It's a application-based class, and I like the fact that all of you are, a couple of you written to me and said, yes, I'm really trying hard to apply what we're learning. That's exactly what you should be doing. So keep that up. That's great. And sometimes the process involves, making some mistakes and then learning from them and moving forward. So don't be discouraged. Just keep going. All of you have a good sense of what you're trying to do, and we just got to build on that and move forward for the last 2 speeches. Those 2 speeches are worth more too. This speech was 100 points, 10% of your final grade. The next speech is 150 points, 15% of your final grade. And the last speech is 200 points, which is 20% of your final grade. So the idea is that you will be applying more and more of what you're learning and improving. Now, I say that, and also the expectations go up because more is expected for each speech, but that's because we're covering more things. Like today, we're going to be covering audience analysis and supporting materials. And after today, you should have a much better idea of how to cite sources, what kind of supporting materials they are, and how you use them. So let's jump in, and we'll go ahead and start with what we have planned for today. That's just kind of an overall setup for you as we begin today. All right. Again, if anybody has any questions, please make sure that you ask those questions for us, and go ahead and find out all your answers because you need to have the answers in order to be successful in here. All right. Don't be afraid to ask is what I'm saying. All right. Terrific. So you should be seeing pretty much a blank slide right now. Yes. Is that what you're seeing, or are you seeing the whole slide? Is it blank? Jenny, it's blank, isn't it? Okay. Well, we're going to start then. What do you mean? Why should I believe you? And so what? Imagine your audience asking these questions as you're presenting your speech. And the way they go is like, what do you mean? Like, please help me understand. Why should I believe you? Like, why are you qualified to talk on this topic? And the third question, so what? I have it in parentheses for you. Why does it matter to me? The way that a speaker answers these questions is through the use of good supporting materials. And that's the first of our topics of class today. The other is going to be audience analysis. So what we're going to be doing today as we move through class is talking about chapter 8 first. It's 6 and 8, but we're going to start with chapter 8 first in your text if you're taking notes. And we have some specific goals with our class today. Here they are on the screen for you. We want to identify the 3 basic types of supporting materials, recognize how to effectively use these supporting materials in your upcoming speeches and any oral communication that you do. We'll view some examples and discuss some tips on how to use support materials effectively. Then in the second part of class, we'll learn some tactics on what's called audience analysis so that you can create an audience-centered speech. It's really all about your audience. That's why you're giving your speeches. And so another reason why I encourage you to watch your classmates' speeches. And finally, we will look at an upcoming assignment for this weekend called the Peer Evaluation Essay Assignment. That's a little different. You're not going to have to do that for this one, but it's going to be for round 2 speeches. Okay, that's good. Looks like we have a full house now. Hudson, Kensley, glad you're here. Everybody, glad you're here. Please remember to participate as we move through our class today. So, your upcoming speeches. We looked at speech number 2, and I don't know if you've read that carefully, but when you read it, you'll see it requires the use of at least 3 documented sources. Those are supporting materials, part of your supporting materials. And so all of your upcoming speeches, both of them, I should say, contain a research element. And that means you need to have some supporting materials. These are your subpoints and your sub-subpoints. You invent the main points, what you want to communicate about your topic, and then you do your research to help support those. And that's where we're going. So there are 3 basic types of supporting materials. These are your examples, your statistics, and your testimonies. And as you're using supporting materials, please remember, there are ethical considerations. You have to use them in an appropriate way, and we'll talk about some of those today. We'll add to that when we do our unit on ethics on Friday. All right, so with the supporting materials, examples, statistics, and testimonies, that's our first goal of class today, is to learn the 3 basic types. So let's go through these a little more specifically, talk about each one and how you use them. So an example, a definition, I don't know if you need to jot down the definition. I think you all know what an example is. It's just a specific case used to illustrate an idea. Now, when we're talking about using examples in a speech, sometimes speakers even say, for example, and that's fine if you want to do that. You don't have to every time. It's just something that may work. But the types of examples that we will be discussing are the brief example, the extended example. Those 2 are pretty easy to define based on their names. And then the hypothetical example. And when you think about hypothetical, I hope you know what that means. If not, you will in just a couple of moments. So first of all, the brief example, referred in passing. Let's listen. I think the best way to talk about these is for you to listen to the speakers, the examples that your textbook author gives you, and just we'll talk about this for a moment. Listen to what this speaker is trying to illustrate by the use of several brief examples.
Many of us are familiar with prominent Chicanos and Chicanas, such as actress Jessica Alba, boxer Oscar de la Hoya, and guitarist Carlos Santana. But you may be less familiar with other Americans of Mexican origin who have made important contributions to U.S. society. Nancy Lopez played a crucial role in popularizing women's professional golf and won 48 tour championships. Dr. Ellen Ochoa is a former astronaut who logged more than 480 hours in space and invented several optical methods that greatly aid space exploration. Dr. Mario Molina won the 1995 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his research on the formation and decomposition of the ozone layer.
Okay, so you heard 3 brief examples there. And what was she trying to illustrate? None of them were main points. They were 3 examples of what? Do you remember what she said in the beginning? Who were all those people?
It was examples of people who weren't just actresses or celebrities that did evolutions for Latinos.
Right, Mexican Americans is what she said. Right, exactly. Yes, so she didn't do a main point, or the speech wasn't about any one of them. It was advances that these folks have made as Mexican Americans. Okay, brief examples, just a little bit about them. And she used them all to support that point she was trying to make about the progress and the contributions of prominent Mexican Americans. Good, so that's a brief example. You usually sometimes can string those together. Rather than giving one long, what we're going to call an extended example. Extended example is a story or narrative at length. It's developed fully to illustrate a point. And of course, Dr. Lucas gives us a video of an extended example too. Let's listen to this one and we'll talk about what's trying to be illustrated here and how it worked for you. Just listen to how the student does with it.
One friend called him the funniest person I've ever known. Other friends called him a military hero. Everyone said that what happened to him was tragic. Curtis Gearhart was a lovable guy who grew up in Iowa and went to Des Moines Lincoln High School. Eager to serve his country, he enlisted in the Army right after graduation and served 2 tours of duty in Iraq. But when he came home to Iowa, he knew things were different. He felt guilty that fellow soldiers were losing their lives overseas, and every day he suffered blinding, excruciating headaches. So he went to a nearby VA hospital for help. They told him he'd have to wait 5 to 6 weeks for treatment. The wait was too much. The headaches and heartaches were too much. So one Monday evening, Curtis took his own life. Tragically, he became one of the 20 American veterans who commit suicide every day.
All right, so where's she going with this speech? Anybody know? It's probably going to be a persuasive speech. What do you think she wants? What do you think she's advocating for in this speech? I know we haven't heard the whole thing. That was just one example, but it was an extended example. Where do you think she's...
veterans with PTSD?
Yeah, benefits for veterans with PTSD and maybe getting them better help. Maybe it's something about the VA hospitals, because she said something about how she had to wait for weeks at the VA hospital, right? So something to do with that, Tori, you're right. And it's just that's the way she set it up. That was an extended example. She named the person. I don't know if you remember the name, but do you remember the name of the person that she was talking about in the example? It was Curtis. The value of naming it gives a persona. You may not have remembered the name, but when you talk about it, instead of just saying there was a guy who, it's different when you say Curtis. She even gave us his last name. That makes it seem more real. Now, this extended example could be real. It probably was real. I don't know that she identified completely that it wasn't real. So I would assume it's an honest and real story of either somebody she knows or somebody she read about. If it was somebody she read about, she should have cited where she got her source. If it was somebody she knows, you should clarify that too, so that your audience knows. And maybe she was going to do that in a little while. We didn't see the whole speech, so I'm not criticizing what she did. That was a really good extended example, and that's what's being illustrated here. See how it was much longer for the point she was trying to make. Okay, that's good. All right, Hudson, you just hang in there today, and maybe you can get it fixed for tomorrow, but I hope you can hear us. All right, that's good. If you need to comment or anything, just put something in the chat. All right, that's good. Okay, moving along. We've covered the brief example and the extended example. Now we'll look at the third type of example, the hypothetical. This is where you have an example that's describing a fictitious situation. It isn't real, but you make it sound like it's real. That's what a hypothetical example is. So like the other two, let's give you an example of a hypothetical example.
Imagine that you're an eyewitness to a violent crime. Because it's violent, the situation is tense and you're naturally scared. Even if you get a good look at the suspect, your brain and body are on edge. Then, the police bring you to the station for a lineup. Can you accurately pinpoint the perpetrator? According to my audience analysis survey, more than 80% of you think you could.
Ah, okay. So the hypothetical example. What was the first word that she said? Anybody know? A lot of you started your speech with this round.
Imagine.
Yes, she said imagine. That's good, Courtney. So right there, you know what? If she's saying imagine.
It's hypothetical.
Exactly. This is something now, some people would use that and then they'd later say, well, you may have thought this was fiction, but it actually happened to me, or it actually happened to blah, blah, blah. And you can use it that way too. Imagine doesn't always mean it's a hypothetical example, but it's a really good clue if the speaker doesn't later tell you it's real. And you know what? That is one of your ethical obligations when you use a hypothetical example. If you let us believe that it's an imaginary situation, and it is an imaginary situation, that's great. But if it's a real situation and you don't tell us it's real, that's not right. And if it's an imaginary situation and you let us believe it's real situation, that's unethical as well. So in other words, make sure your audience knows. You have to say something like imagine and just leave it like that. Or you have to say something like, well, the situation I just explained never really happened. You can see how it could, and that's one of the criteria for a good hypothetical example. It has to be within the realm of believability. If you're using a hypothetical example, at some point, the audience has to know that it isn't real. Secondly, the other criteria for using a hypothetical example is that it has to be within the realm of believability, and you have to let the audience know that it's not real. That's your ethical obligation. Two components to it. Okay, so if you're going to use those, use them ethically. Make sure we know it's hypothetical. You can lead us on for a while. You can tease us and let us believe it's real for a while. But at some point, even if you tease us in the introduction and let us believe the whole speech, then at the conclusion, you tell us, well, it never really happened. You can see blah, blah, blah. That's fine. Long as we know before you leave. Don't leave the audience believing that a hypothetical example is true when it isn't, especially if it's a personal story, because you're allowed to do that. Again, tease us for a while, but just make sure you come clean and let us know by the end. Clear on the hypothetical, everybody? Yeah? She also used an audience survey in that little clip you just saw, right? Does anybody remember what the question was that she asked her audience and how many people said yes? I know it's been a minute or two. We talked about the example a lot. Anybody remember? It was about perpetrators, right? And
It was like 80% think in the audience that they can like identify somebody dealing with something.
yeah, identify someone out of a line. If you ever watch Law and Order or some of those shows, right, where they always put the lineup up and they have to say something, and the victim has to try to identify who it was. That's probably a lot harder than we think because there's emotions involved and it's tough sometimes. But anyway, so she used that and she was probably going to go into some of that in her speech. Now that's audience analysis, which we're going to get to in the second half. If you ever want to do an audience survey in this class, and I encourage you to, you may want to find out what your audience knows about your topic or how they feel about your topic. And you can do that via a little email survey. You can do what's the Survey Monkey if you want to. You don't have to. If it's just a question or whatever, you can ask it in an email and ask everybody to respond to you and include me in that email if you do, because I'm part of your audience too. All right, so those are our three examples: the brief example, the extended example, and the hypothetical examples. And there are ethical considerations for all. The biggest one being, if it's not your original example, you need to tell us where you got it. And that's perfectly fine. You're allowed to borrow things from sources. And that's what we're getting into the rest of this chapter right now. Okay, tips for using examples. This is what you want to jot down, folks. Clarify, personalize, and reinforce ideas. That's why you use examples: to clarify, to personalize, and to reinforce ideas, or maybe one of the three, maybe not all three every example. You want to make your examples vivid and richly textured. You may have heard some of the specific word choices that some of those speakers used. And practice your delivery of your examples. Don't just write example of in your speaking outline, but put some of the words that you really want to say. And in your prep outline, write out exactly what you want to say. Every sentence with a new number. These are probably going to be numbers under a subpoint. These are probably subpoints because they're the details of the example of when you were being stalked or whatever it is, when you did really well on a test or the whatever. There's a lot of different ways you can word this, but you want to make sure that you practice it and plan it fully. Practicing examples and writing them out fully also helps you know how much time they take, so you know you're going to stay in the parameters of your speech. Questions on examples. That's the first type of supporting materials. Any questions? All right. Glad to see you're with us, Hudson. Okay, maybe your microphone will work when you want to talk to now. Good for you for figuring it out. Okay, so moving along. Enhancing your ideas is another way that you use good supporting materials, using examples. Let's listen to this one.
Remember Dwayne McNamara, who I mentioned in my introduction? He lives here in Madison. Because of the Literacy Network, he now works at a home improvement store where reading instructions and dealing with customers is essential. He is also able for the first time to help his kids with their homework. He even reads to them every night before bed. The Literacy Network gave me the skills I needed to succeed, Dwayne says. I have become more confident and I am more motivated and excited to go forward with life.
Good. So there was an example. That was probably an extended example of the story of Dwayne and how literacy has helped him in the city of Madison, Wisconsin. That's where Stephen Lucas taught at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for a good number of years. He's a retired professor now. You're author of your textbook, your main author. He's got some partners now on the textbook. Okay, good. The second type of supporting materials after examples are statistics. Now, these are the measures of statistics. We don't have to get into those right now, but who wants to just define what is a statistic? Somebody give me a definition. How would you define statistics?
Like a number that's backed up by research to prove a point.
Excellent. Good. That's great. What Hudson just said is good. You also can write it's a number fact. It's a statement you're making that should have been proven true, backed up by research, like he said, and it's a number fact. Okay, so that's what you want to look for. Now, mean, median, and mode. These are classic statistical measures. If you take our statistics classes here, you'll probably use these. We don't use these too much in oral communication because number one, they all kind of sound alike. And when you're giving a speech, your audience may have to think, okay, median, that means, I have to do that translation kind of when I'm listening to these words. You might all know what these mean, and that's great. My advice to you is if you're going to say the average of a bunch of numbers, then just say average. Don't say mean. It's only one syllable more, and it's a lot easier for the audience to get it like that rather than everything mean. Okay, that means average, right? Okay, so let's move through these and just make sure everybody's clear of what they mean. Mean means the average. Median is the middle figure in a group of numbers. Mode is the number that occurs most frequently. So yeah, you could see the most frequent number here is, and you could say it that way. It's much easier in oral communication to help the audience and not use these terms in oral communication, but they are part of statistics, and that's why we bring them up today. Let's listen to this speaker use these statistics in combination with each other and talk about how it worked for you and maybe what could have been better or what worked really well for you.
According to the most recent issue of National Geographic, air pollution results in the deaths of about 7 million people each year. That makes it 5 times as deadly as traffic accidents. In purely economic terms, air pollution costs the global economy over $5 trillion annually. Even here in the United States, 60,000 people die each year from this silent killer.
Okay, so how did you think he used those statistics in combination with each other? Comments on it? Anything he did well? Tell us where he got them from.
According to the most recent issue of National Geographic.
Okay, so what did you hear right there? The most recent issue of
National Geographic.
Okay, good. So he's telling us where he got them. He told us the date, most recent. That used to be I think it used to be a monthly magazine. I think it still is. I'm not sure. I haven't seen a print copy of it for a while, but they might be an online copy too. So yeah, he told us where he got his information. He gave us the numbers. That's all good stuff, right? He also related the statistics to something else. That's a way you can make statistics more meaningful to your audience by relating it to something that they're more familiar with. Okay, if you're talking about an area of land and it's you could say something like it's about the same square footage as we have on our whole Newberry College campus. That might be a really good way to help people understand how big of a piece of land you're talking about. Because if you're talking about the University of South Carolina campus or any major university, it's a much larger piece of land than Newberry College is. And that's the kind of comparisons you want to make for people instead of just saying the number of acres it is. Because number of acres doesn't really resonate with me. Okay, so that's good. So you want to make your stats meaningful. Anything he could have done to improve that presentation of those statistics? Anybody have any ideas? I have one idea, but I want to see if any of you can pick up on it. We went over this unit last week on Friday, I think. He gave us a lot of numbers. I don't know if you remember any of the numbers, do you? No, and we even had the closed captions on so you could see them for a second. I would encourage this student to use some visual aids to help the audience remember the numbers, even if it's just a number on a screen or a number on a screen with just a little brief description after it as you're saying them. Visual aids can really help with statistics. So consider that as you're sharing statistics in the speech. I always say if there's more than one number, I need a visual because I'm not remembering it if it's more than one number. It's just hard to remember it. Okay, so statistics. Okay, here's another one of making stats meaningful. We're not going to watch her because we already watched one. Okay, a testimony. The third type of supporting material. We have our examples and our statistics. The third type now are your testimonies. And here's the definition. That's Lucas's definition from your textbook. I would define a testimony as something somebody has to say about your topic. That's a simple way to think. That's what a testimony is. It's something somebody has to say about your topic. That's all a testimony is. And the somebody can be almost anybody, but there are different kinds of testimonies that you might want to use. One of them is an expert testimony. Clearly, experts testimony from recognized experts. This is pretty strong supporting materials when you have a medical topic you're talking about and you quote a medical doctor, or an educational topic and you're quoting an educator or an administrator in education, or a political topic and you're quoting, I won't say a politician, but maybe a politician, maybe a political science instructor, maybe someone who's been connected to the field or worked in the field for years. So you see, you want to try and find experts in the field. Now, you don't have to know these people personally, but you can look up some of their works, because a lot of experts write articles, write books. They're online, they're in libraries, you can find them. So that's what I would encourage you to do for some expert testimony on your topic. This is a great piece of supporting material in almost any speech. Listen to this expert testimony, see if you know who the expert is, what their credentials are, and what is it that the speaker is trying to communicate from this expert.
Lead in our drinking water comes primarily from lead pipes that carry water into our homes, offices, schools, and dormitories. It's hard to say exactly how many lead pipes are out there. A 2016 article in the Detroit Free Press explains that most cities didn't track the use of lead pipes historically. However, a recent study by Joseph Ferry, an economist at Northwestern University, shows that around 6 million homes receive water through lead pipes. Another 81 million homes receive water through pipes with lead soldering and fixtures, which can leach just as much lead into the water supply as the pipes themselves.
Wow. Okay. I don't know if you all have kept up with news in recent years, but back in 2015-16 and the end of that decade, we had some real issues with water around Flint, Michigan, and other areas in the state of Michigan. So appropriate topic, they're in Wisconsin, which is right next to Michigan. So yeah. Okay, back to the expert testimony. Was the student the expert? The student who was giving the speech? No, that wasn't the expert. Who was the expert? Do you remember what the person's position was? He said the
He was a
person's name.
professor at a university.
Yeah, at Northwestern University, who studies this information. And then the person conducted a study and found those statistics that he shared, how there were X number of 6 million or so that had lead pipes, and another, this was staggering to me, I did not know this, 81 million other homes had soldering or elements of lead pipes. So that could really affect water. Well, do you all know what we use for piping now in homes? They're not really lead pipes anymore. Anybody know what we use mostly? It's white plastic. Anybody know what it's called for piping for plumbing in houses?
Stucco?
PVC.
Yes, and what'd you say, Hudson?
I said stucco, but I don't think that's.
Oh yeah, no, that's wall covering. No, it's the PVC pipes. Yeah, the PVC pipes. They're just hard plastic and they're real inexpensive, and they're just a lot more reliable, because over time the lead pipes will also corrode and rust, and then that gets in your water, and then sometimes they break, and so they got to be replaced. We have a lot of lead pipes at Newberry College because of when the college was built. And sometimes we have to dig up big holes in the ground and replace them. You probably, if you were a student here last year, saw some of that on the quad. Okay, so yeah, so that's a real issue. But the point that we're getting with this expert testimony is that the professor who studies this found some real good research to back up what this student was talking about. And so he shared it in his speech and gave credit where credit was due. Peer testimony is the second type of testimony you might use, expert and peer. And this is just what somebody has to say about your topic. It's testimony from ordinary people. You might use your classmate as a peer testimony if they have a thought on your topic. They don't have to be an expert in the field. They just have to be someone who has a thought on the topic that helps support the point of your speech or helps inform us. Expert testimony is probably better for informative speaking, but peer testimony can be very persuasive. You might see peer testimony in advertising, where they show a bunch of normal people and they're all enjoying life because they've tried a certain product, whether it's a medicine or a chewing gum, or whether it's a certain kind of food that they have people over. Yeah, these are peer testimonies a lot of times, because those people are saying, I use these products, you should too. They don't always say those words, and a lot of time in television advertising or online advertising, it's video, but that's the same principle. For public speaking, you can ask somebody what they feel about the topic or get a quote from them about your topic. and ask them, if you do this, anybody, whether it's an expert or a peer, if you're asking, doing an interview, saying, hey, if you know a doctor, maybe you have a family member who's a doctor or a good friend, and you're doing a medical topic for your speech, either one persuasive or informative research that's coming up. If you know a medical doctor and you want to get a quotation from them, just do that and ask them, say, I'm in a speech class. I'd like to share this with my class if that's okay with you. Most of the time they'll say fine. But if you're going to quote somebody and you know them, and you should ask them. If you get it from an online source, of course you're free to quote it. You don't have to ask for permission for that, but your ethical obligation is to let us know from what publication, how recent, where you got it. Don't just make up quotes. And don't use quotes without permission if you ask people and it's an oral interview. Okay? Those are some of your obligations. So those are two different types of testimony. Sometimes you'll share a direct quote, testimony presented word for word, and you want to make sure that you don't do an out of context quote. This is where you change something somebody said by removing operative words or phrases. Don't just give us a piece of a quote, but give us the whole quote. That's what's important, so that it means what the speaker intended it to mean. Now, you can give partial quotes as long as you don't distort it. But don't give us just the first half of a quote if it's turning it around at the end. It's like the famous John F. Kennedy quote that we started our class with a week ago. He said, ask not what your country can do for you. But then there's a second half of it, right? He's not telling people just not to ask what the country can do. He's saying, ask what you can do for your country. That's pretty important, because he wanted to turn it around and have people be the ones who are trying to help solve the problems and lead the problems. Okay? So that's important. Don't take a quote out of context. And finally, oftentimes speakers will paraphrase a quote, meaning you'll still give credit to the person who said it, but instead of sharing their exact words with the audience, you'll say their thought of the quote. And so you can do that. What do you think would be a reason why you wouldn't want to share the exact quote? Why would you want to paraphrase and not use the real words? Can anyone think of a reason why?
It's too long to have in your speech.
That's it, Hudson. Yeah, it could be too long. Maybe the wording is a little bit different for the audience that the person said the quote to, and you want to make it in terms that your audience will understand better, because it's all about your audience. And that's the second half of our class, but it really is. So you may want to just paraphrase. But again, your job, your ethical obligation as a speaker is to not distort the quote, even if you paraphrase it, but paraphrase it accurately and make sure that you're not saying something. Now, the third type of testimony, we don't have slides for. Lucas doesn't talk about it specifically in your chapter. But the third type of testimony, after expert, after peer, is the celebrity testimony or prestige testimony. Anybody know what this would be? What do you think celebrity testimony is? You've probably heard some here and there, scrolling through social media. Go ahead, Jenny.
It's like those commercials where a celebrity is trying to sell you a product and they don't have any credibility if they're trying to sell you like a toothpaste, where it's not, obviously they're not a dentist, but because of their reputation, you're going to buy something from them. Same thing if an athlete.
Athletes do it a lot, right? Tom Brady was advertising for Subway and their fresh baked buns, and he even mocked himself in the commercial. He goes, and I don't even eat bread. Okay, so he's clearly not an expert, right? But he's Tom Brady and people know who he is, so they're going to listen, right? So now sometimes it's commercials, other times it's politics. You ever heard celebrities or singers or Oprah Winfrey or whoever endorse a certain political candidate? Yeah, they're not experts in the field. They're not lay people. Oprah Winfrey's not a lay person. Okay, neither is your music stars of today or your actors of today or your professional athletes. They're not people like us, but they might make their opinions known. When LeBron James says who he supports, some people are going to follow that. Hopefully you can give a reasoned opinion. It's not just I'm going because LeBron James likes him, but you can do your own research and figure out why LeBron James likes him if LeBron doesn't say that, or if the entertainer doesn't say that. Because when you use a prestige testimony or celebrity testimony, oftentimes it's to just to maybe capture attention. And that's what I would suggest to you. Where's your attention capturing device in your speech? Where do you use that?
In the introduction?
Absolutely, Cami. Yes, it's the first thing you say. So maybe you want to use that celebrity testimony in the introduction somewhere or in the conclusion. It's much more well placed there than if it was in the body and you're trying to make a serious point and you're quoting Oprah Winfrey about a political topic, or you're quoting some entertainer about, another topic about religion or about, whatever news topics. They're not going to carry as much weight as the expert testimonies usually, but they can be very effective in your introduction or your conclusion. And make sure that you write down, don't just say so and so once said, but in an interview that was published in, tell us where you got it so we know it's legitimate. All right, so that's using testimony, 3 types of testimony. Here are your tips. Jot these down if you haven't been taking a whole lot of notes. You've got your expert and your peer testimony and also your celebrity testimony. Quote or paraphrase accurately, use qualified and unbiased sources, and identify the sources. And now we're getting to the most important slides. If you haven't been writing down a lot of things yet, these are the ones you definitely want to write down, because we're getting to the ones that will really help you in your speeches when you're citing a source. Your next 2 speeches have a requirement of 3 complete source citations minimum. You can have 4, you can have 5, 6, maybe. You probably won't have more than that because you just don't have time. You have a 6-minute speech maximum. So if you get 3 or 4, maybe 5, that's great. But here is what you want to make sure you include. This is the most important slide you've seen so far. Just want to make sure you know that. You should cite the name of the document, according to the most recent edition of National Geographic magazine, the author or sponsoring organization in an article written by. Now, all these speakers you saw today in the video clips did not say the author. I encourage you to say the author. And maybe you give us the sponsoring organization if we don't know. National Geographic's pretty well known. But if it's just a website that not a lot of people have heard about, maybe you want to tell us what those qualifications are, why it's a good source. Remember the questions with which we started class. What do you mean? Why should I believe you? And so what? If you're answering why should I believe you, tell us enough about the source so we say, oh, okay, I see why Jenny picked this. This is good. I see why Kashani used this. I understand now. I didn't know that website, but now I get enough from her that I do. And the published date or updated date, not the date you looked at it online. That's not important. We know you're looking at it in the last week because you're preparing your speech this weekend. But when was it published? How recent is it? That's what's important. So these are the qualifications you want to put into citing sources. Did everybody get a chance to copy these down? Anybody still need it? Can I move on? Yeah, move on. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. And we're going to get to oral source citation. Now, this is kind of long, but it's a long quote if you look at the bottom of it. Everything in the first half of it are the requirements, and then here's the quote. So just take a read at this, and I'll be quiet for a minute. Yeah, everybody read it? Give me some head nods if you're finished. Yeah? Okay, saw a couple. Everybody else finished? Okay, all right, good. So we got the publication, we got the date, we have the author, we have the author's credentials, and we have the topic, AI-driven chat box in scientific journals, and then we've got her quote, which is pretty straightforward and to the point. This can lead to misinformation and junk science. I think you're pretty clear on what this person is saying, right? With that quote right there. So this is a really good use of an oral source citation. This is what you want. It takes a little while, but go ahead and outline it. And one of the hints that I'm giving people in feedback on outlines is every sentence needs a new letter or number. So if you were to do this, you might have a number 1 for the Guardian, and then the next one, Chat GPT would be number 2. And then the last line, this can lead to that, those are different lines in your outline. You want to do that because it's easier when you're presenting to make sure everything starts at the left side when you have a new sentence. So you can look up and you know where to look back down. It's always going to be on the left side. Okay, good. So that's an oral source citation. Here are the requirements for a good oral source citation, and that's what you want to work into your next speech. It takes a little time. Remember when we talked about the works cited on the prep outline? That's why you need a bibliographic entry there in your works cited list in MLA or APA. And I'm telling you, if you go to the link, oftentimes it'll give you a click and you can find the APA citation or the MLA citation. So just use that information that's out there. You don't ever say those to us in the speech, but you'll say them in this way rather than, the bibliographic format. You're going to say it as in conversation, and that's what this is right here. Okay, so try and make sure you get all this information in there. It is long, but remember, this first half is really what the requirements are, and then it's the quote. If you took all this out, I went the wrong way there. If you took everything out from, this, you could have said everything and then just gone to this can lead to information and misinformation and junk science. You could do that too. It's just what you need to communicate to the audience. This speaker felt like they wanted to include it all. Okay, so we've covered now supporting materials. This is a lot of what our goals of the class were today. We want to try to make sure that you know what the 3 types of supporting materials are, the different types of those supporting materials and how you use them in tips, and what's required in a complete and ethical source citation. To recap, you want to answer those 3 questions. Why should I believe you? What do you mean? And so what? As we were giving your speech. So keep those thoughts in mind as you're writing your speech and try and answer them for your audience. The 3 basic types of support materials. Who remembers what they are? All 3. Someone go ahead and say them. What do we have for our 3 types of support materials?
Examples, statistics, and testimony.
Good. And under examples, we had 3 different kinds of examples. Who remembers those?
Brief, extended, and hypothetical.
Good. And remember, with hypothetical, you have 2 requirements. Number 1, it's got to be within the realm of believability. And number 2, you've got to acknowledge to your audience at some point that it's hypothetical. Those are your ethical responsibilities and effective use of hypothetical examples. Good. In statistics, you have all those statistical measures, but I encourage you to use the real words. So average is average. Just say that. The audience will get it much easier and quicker. Okay. And statistics are number facts. You should back them up with research and tell us where you got them and why we should believe them. Who did the study? Where was it published? Are they reputable sources? Tell us that. Tell us why they're reputable. Okay. And then with the third one, testimonies, we had 3 kinds of testimonies. Who remembers what those are? 2 in the book and 1 I just gave you extra. What are those?
Expert testimony, peer testimony, and celebrity testimony.
Very good. Celebrity testimony is best maybe used in the intro or the conclusion, but the expert and the peer can be worked in wherever. Just make sure you cite your sources, whether it's from print or whether it's from an interview. Interviews are research too. When I say you have to have at least 3 documented sources, if you do an interview with someone, you just document the interview. Say it's called personal interview, put the person's name, their position, and the date, and that's fine. And you could say that in your speech. In an interview with Dr. ABC that I conducted personally on January 13th, 2023, I learned that, and then you just say what the doctor said. That's fine. But again, one of your ethical requirements is to ask the person if you're going to quote them in the speech. Most people are flattered. Most people will say absolutely. Now, if it's a sensitive topic and you're talking about something that maybe somebody shares with you in confidence, if they ask you not to share it, don't share it. I mean, just don't share it. If they ask you to share it, but share it anonymously, you can do that in your speech. It's not quite as effective as a full source citation because we don't have their name, but the audience will understand. Just try and make sure you have 3 other full ones in addition to that if you use that as a source for this speech. And make sure in other speeches that you have enough other supporting materials that are verified so the audience will accept 1 or 2 that, are anonymous. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody? Yeah? Okay, good. So remember that there are all these different types of supporting materials. You use some of them in your first speech, and you might not have even known what we were going to call them, but there are always ethical considerations for your audience, for the people that you're quoting. And you don't want to quote things out of context. You want to make sure that you paraphrase accurately if you're paraphrasing. And the two factors that govern whatever support materials you use are your audience and your purpose. Think about to whom you're speaking and why you're adding this supporting material in, and make it appropriate for your audience and for your purpose. Questions over supporting materials from anyone? 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, then we've just learned about supporting materials, and that's one of our two major topics in class today. And that's the bulk of your speech too, your subpoints, your sub-subpoints. So now to select the most appropriate, we just said this, you have to know your audience. So now we're going to describe audience analysis and how you find out some information about your audience. But before we do that, let's just talk about a holiday. You know, we just had our holiday season. We're coming out of it. Well, some people may still have decorations up in their homes. I don't. Mine are gone. But you know, even if it's a birthday or if it's a holiday or if it's an anniversary or if it's Valentine's Day, which is coming up, if you have a significant other, don't wait too long. But some of you might choose to give somebody a gift, right? Or you may have gotten a really cool gift recently or sometime in your past. Who wants to describe the process when you go to select a gift for somebody, a present? What do you think about when you're trying to choose a gift for somebody? Anybody want to share that?
Something they need. I think that's my first step.
Yeah, that's a great first thought. Something they might need. Good. Who else has thoughts?
Something that interests them.
Beautiful. Something that interests them. Excellent. Any other thoughts when you're selecting a gift for someone? What do you think about?
How to make them feel special with what you got them.
Wow, Jenny, that's wonderful. Yeah, good. Any other thoughts? That's all good. Does anybody ever think about what the person already has so you don't get that something that they already have? Yeah, and sometimes you don't know, right? But sometimes you do. If they're a really close friend, you probably know. And what about this thought? Does anybody ever buy a gift of something that you would like to receive for a gift? Sometimes that works. Sometimes that helps, especially if the person's a lot like you. So all these criteria, why are we talking about gifts? I'm not going to buy you gifts. I don't expect you to buy me gifts. But we're talking about gifts because when you're thinking about a gift, you're totally focused on the person that you're going to give that gift to, that present to. And the root of the word presentation is present or present, right? So if you think of your speech as a gift you're giving to the audience, and you think about what we might like or what we might need or what we already have so you don't give us the same information, right? You also think about what we might like to have, like all these things you just said. It's very similar to the process of selecting a gift. The one thing nobody mentioned in the process of selecting a gift yet is, I'm sure some of you thought of it, you have to think about how much money you have to spend, right? Your budget. Everybody thinks about that, right? Okay. So, well, you don't have a budget for public speaking, but what do you think your budget would transfer into in our situation? What's your budget for a speech?
Time limit.
Yes, Faith, time limit. Excellent. That's exactly right. How much can you put into this gift, this speech, this presentation for 5 minutes? You have to think about your speeches as 5 minutes long. If you just think that generally, then you're in good shape. Then you'll probably be between 4 and 6 minutes. Okay, so that's what you want to do as you're thinking about speech topics, as you're thinking about your audience, and that's being audience centered. So let's go ahead into our visuals for analyzing the audience. And I probably mentioned Oprah a little while ago because, well, there she is on our cover slide for analyzing the audience. All right, so we're going to go through some techniques, some ideas about audience analysis. And one of the key points you want to take from this, everybody, is you have a controlled audience for these speeches. They're all here on camera except one person right now, or in the class, I should say, except one person. Olivia had to leave a little early today, and I knew that about her. So anyway, but include her, include all these people. I've sent you all emails. You can go into your roster tab on Wolf Den and find all the names of all your classmates and me. I believe there's a button in there that you can click and email everybody. I can do that. I don't know if you can or not. Does anybody know if you can students do that too? I think you can. Okay. Kishana's saying you can. Good. So if you want to ask us a question, do. All right. So when we're talking about audience analysis and audience centeredness, these are the questions you want to ask yourself. To whom am I speaking? What do I want them to know, believe, or do? And what is the most effective way of accomplishing that? Talking about these three for a moment, well, I know you don't all know each other very well or me very well, but we've been together now for a week, an hour and a half a day. When you watch the speeches, you will learn a lot more about your classmates too, because you'll learn that's what that personal inspirational speech was about. It also helps to get to know each other in this class. So make sure that you watch all those speeches. So you're going to know your classmates. The basics, you know. What's one thing we all have in common in your audience? Even me.
We're all in college.
Yeah, or we're all at Newberry College. I'm not necessarily a student, but I'm part of your audience too. But yes, Hudson, that's great. We're all part of the Newberry College community. That's great. Okay, we're all in this online environment. Okay, it's a beginning public speaking course. So all these things are in common. That's to whom you're speaking. And you know you have an audience of 12. That makes a difference too, when you know how many people you're speaking to. The second question, what do I want them to know, believe, or do? Well, you know what we call that? We call that your specific purpose. At the end of my speech, I want my audience to. That's what you focus on to be audience centered. You notice how when you worded your specific purpose, I was real particular to say, include the words my audience in there to inform my audience of 3 ways you can bake a cake. I don't know, whatever your topic's going to be, right? Okay, so yeah, so you want to make sure that you include this information and you analyze your audience even on these basic levels. And finally, what is the most effective way of accomplishing that? Well, we talked about that a little bit yesterday with different organizational patterns. Maybe your topic lends itself to a spatial organization if you're talking about from Newberry College. Maybe you want to use chronological for historical topics or steps in a process. You know, that's the most effective way of accomplishing that. Maybe you're talking about a problem and you want a solution. You want to offer us a solution. Well, that's maybe more effective than just saying the problem, because nothing's going to get done. But if you give us a solution, maybe somebody will help you enact it. Okay, so these are the questions you want to ask yourself to be audience centered. And remember that phrase, because as we define audience centeredness, it is simply keeping the audience foremost in mind during every step. It doesn't say here, but I would put every step right in here. During every step of speech preparation and presentation. That's audience centeredness. You're thinking about us. So here's a little brief pop oral quiz. Ready? See if somebody can answer it. I'll give you a hint. The answer is easy. Who are you thinking about when you're choosing your topic?
The audience.
That's right. All right. Who are you thinking about when you're choosing your supporting materials?
Audience.
There you go. Yes, the audience. Absolutely. That's the answer for all these questions. Who are you thinking about when you're organizing your speech? Who are you thinking about when you're doing your research? Who are you thinking about when you're writing the body and the introduction and the conclusion? When you're wording your main points? When you're deciding what to wear for your speech? Think about your audience. When you're picking your visual aids, think about your audience. If you keep that mindset, it takes some of the pressure off of you too, because you're just giving us a gift. That's really what it's about. It might not be the perfect gift. That's tough to do, but just make it a really good gift. Okay, so that's how we're going to think about audience centeredness, keeping your audience foremost in mind during every step of speech preparation and presentation. And when you're talking to the camera, take a look right now around the room, everybody. Everybody look at the camera for just a second. Give us all a smile so everybody can see who we're talking to. Okay, there you go. That's nice. This is who you're talking to. It's okay. And we all want you to do well. We all want to have good speech. I really want you to have good speeches. All right. The reason that you want to keep the audience in mind is because people, as a rule, tend to be egocentric. That's concerned with what is about us. It's not a bad thing. It is a bad thing if that's all you're concerned with. But honestly, if you're telling me about a topic and you make it relate to my life, I'm going to be much more likely to listen to you than if it's just something that, you know, has no connection to me. That's why one of your jobs as a speaker is to relate your topic to your audience. Whatever your topic might be, find a way to give us a reason to listen. Okay, so moving through the tips for audience analysis. One of the ways you can identify with your audience is through this phrase called identification. It's just when you emphasize things that are in common with your audience. We already said we're all part of Newberry College. The bulk of your audience are students right now, and it's fine if you use that. But don't say since all of us are students, say since most of us are students, or almost all of us are students. You have to say qualifiers like that, okay? But when you emphasize common values, goals, and experiences, anybody know who's in that picture? Who is that person in the picture? Anybody know? Pretty important person right now, not as important maybe as others, but he's running for president. I don't know if he's going to make it much longer. He may have to stop soon, but that's Chris Christie. He's a former governor of New Jersey running for the Republican nomination for president of the United States. And when politicians talk to people, right now it's in Iowa, because Iowa is having their caucuses. That's like a primary, but they're going to put forth the person they think should be the Republican nominee. I think it's on the 15th. I think it's a few days from now. Yeah. And so the Republicans are fighting each other right now, trying to be the most popular in Iowa or persuade people why they should be the nominee. I shouldn't say most popular. But Chris Christie, and but politicians, all of them do it. Joe Biden does it. Barack Obama did it. Everybody does it. Donald Trump does it. Everybody does it who's running for office. They try to identify with the people to whom they're speaking, emphasizing common goals, value. Because politicians really aren't like us. They're not normal people. A lot of them are really rich. A lot of them have different life experiences than we have had. So they have to focus on these things to help people like them. And now you are not a politician, but you can do the same thing in a speech on a smaller scale by getting people to understand and tie into some common values or experiences or goals. Stuff about the college, stuff about South Carolina, those kind of things. All right, so that's the concept of identification. Now, ways that you can gather information systematically about your audience is called a demographic audience analysis. There's one of two analyses we're going to talk about. But when you're talking about demographics of an audience, you're talking about different factors of the people who make up your audience, like what's their basic age range, religious backgrounds, if that's something that's known. What's the racial, ethnic, and cultural background of your audience? What about gender identity or sexual orientation, group memberships? Now, some of these you don't know, but the point is to not assume either. You can ask questions and try and find out some of these things, but some of them are kind of sensitive and you don't go asking questions about them. But depending upon the event, you might want to assume that you have a broad gender identity or sexual orientation, depending upon the event. And really, you might want to assume that all the time because you just don't know, right? Group memberships. When you can tap into group memberships, that's really good. How many student athletes? Raise your hand if you are, and Faith, you can raise your electronic hand if you need to. How many students here are a student athlete? Raise your hands. Okay, almost every hand went up except for two. Kensley's and mine didn't go up. Okay, yeah. So you know that 90% of your class almost are student athletes. Olivia's a student athlete too. Okay, I think she said that in her first speech. You'll hear that. Okay, so yeah, but so you know that that's a group membership. Now we have several different teams represented here, but the fact that we have so many student athletes is significant for this small audience. What's our basic age range in this audience? Does anybody know? Like what would be the youngest age range, probably, being that you're all college students?
Probably around like 18 to 24.
Kishana gets an A for the day because she said 24, and I'm included in that. So thank you very much. I'm well over 24, though, just telling you. Okay. No, the basic age range, yeah, is probably about 18 to 24. You're absolutely right. You have one outlier there who's, much older than that. But that's fine. But age, so you can think about that. And that's fine. But just don't say since all of us are under 25, because you don't know that for sure, and you know that's not true for sure, because I am not. Okay, so yeah, racial, ethnic, cultural background, some of that just from looking around your screen and from our Newberry College student body. We have international students in this class as well, don't we? We have at least one international student. Hudson's from Canada. Do we have any other international students in our class? Everybody else domestic students? Okay. All right, good. So we're not even all, Hudson, I don't know if you're an American citizen. I suppose you're not. Are you? No, okay, good. So we can't assume that everybody's a Canadian, an American citizen, excuse me, because we're not. Okay, good. So you understand, but if you want some of this, if you want to know if people have a religious background and you want to do a survey, maybe you just want to put out a question about something like, were you raised in any organized religion? And then we're going to talk about closed-ended questions. Those are sometimes better than open-ended. Some people might not want to answer that. So always give an option of that if you're doing a questionnaire. But you might have, yes, and then they can list it. No, you can have prefer not to say, or don't know, or something like that. And if you get data that helps you in a questionnaire, and you probably have a few more questions too, but if you get data that helps you, you can use it in your speech. In my audience survey that I did just last weekend, I found that 10 out of 12 members of this audience, and it would be 11 out of 13, including me, were raised in a highly religious background, what they would call a highly religious background. If that helps you, use it. Just leave the others off who said no or whatever. But you have to report that because that's the honest results you found. Sometimes people will do surveys through the college when we're in season, when we're in semester, excuse me. And those have to go through a reporting body. We can't just send around a survey to everyone on Newberry College campus. We can do it in this controlled environment, but if you're going to do a larger one, you have to get permission. We have a group that approves that. But anyway, you can do that. And real life, when you're not in a speech class, you can ask the person who's invited you to speak or where you applied to speak, find out who's going to be there. If you're going to a conference, what age range are we talking about? High school students through professionals? I go to a conference that has high school students through professionals. So when I plan, if I'm presenting there, I got to think about, okay, I may have, 15-year-olds and I may have, people who've been in the business for 40 years like me. So that's what you have to do. You have to think about who your audience is and these different aspects of them. Now, be careful you don't stereotype. Stereotype is an oversimplified image of a group. For example, 12 of our audience members are college students. One is a college professor. Do all college students get drunk every Thursday night? Is that true? Do some college students get drunk every Thursday night? Probably so, yes, okay. All college students don't even drink. I know college students who do not drink. So don't oversimplify an image of a group, but also don't assume that all members of a group are alike. So just keep that in mind as you're doing your surveys and as you're making assumptions if you don't have a survey. The other type of analysis other than demographic is to analyze the situation in which you're speaking, which is called a situational audience analysis. And these are the factors of the situational audience analysis. What's the size of my audience? Well, you know that for us. What's the physical setting? We're doing speeches online recorded. That's different from doing them live in a classroom, especially in the way you present your visuals, especially in the way you don't have to set up the room when you do a speech live. I mean, you can do some things, but for the most part, you go into a room to do a speech live, the visuals are in a certain place for you. The lights are on. They should be good enough. Podium might be there. Yeah. For this, you've got to do a little bit more work to get set up. The physical setting. When you have a larger audience, you plan a different kind of a speech because you may have a real question in a speech by a show of hands. I just did that for y'all. It's not a speech, but when I said, how many of your student athletes, right? I really wanted you to respond and you did. Thank you for that. But when you're in a group of, 300 people, you could do show of hands, but it's not really as effective. You don't probably want to do a live question when you're in a large audience either, because 45 people might shout out. All right. So you want to think about that, whether or not you want live or hypothetical questions. Okay. Disposition toward the topic, disposition toward the speaker, disposition toward the occasion. That just means, how does the audience like your topic? Are they on your side or not? What do they know about your topic? What does the audience know about you? Do they like you? Are they on your side? Are they, do they know you at all? You may have to put a little bit more about yourself if they don't know you at all. And then finally, disposition toward the occasion. What kind of occasion is it? And this is where you go to general purpose first. And you have to ask yourself, am I informing or persuading? Well, I give you that answer in this class. When you're not in this class, you have to decide that on your own. Am I going to try and get them to think or do something? Or am I going to share information with them? Because you set your speeches up differently for that. There is another kind of a general purpose, which we don't talk about in here. It's called to celebrate. But a lot of people do speeches to celebrate. Can anyone think of an example of a speech where the general purpose would be to celebrate? We don't do one in this class, but can anybody think of an example of where your general purpose might be to celebrate? And you're
A
the speaker?
wedding.
A wedding, good. Jenny, what were you going to say?
A toast at a birthday.
Birthday or retirement party, sure. Good. Any others?
Winning an award.
Award, good, Kensley. Yeah, who else said that with Kensley?
Graduation.
Yeah, graduation, absolutely, Hudson. Good. When you give commencement speeches, yes. You know, we have students who give commencement speeches at Newberry College. Have any of you ever attended a spring commencement at Newberry? We have 2 students who are selected, who apply, who work with speech professors like me and Professor Butler. And yeah, they give their speeches. Good. Also, this might surprise you, but a eulogy at a funeral is actually a celebratory speech, because you're celebrating the life of the person who's being honored there, who's not with us any longer. And if you think about it that way, that's really important if you're ever asked to give one, and you might very well be. But you write it as a celebratory speech, celebrating the life. Yes, everybody's hurting who's there. Yes, everybody's heart is broken who's there. But you don't want to dwell on that in your speech. You talk about some of the fond memories, some of the good things, the way you want that person to be remembered, and celebrate their life. It is a celebratory speech in a eulogy. All right, we're doing informative and persuasive speeches here, but what we were talking about is what's the audience's disposition toward the occasion and the topic. In celebratory speeches, they should be more fun, and but they still need to be structured. You still need to be planned and things like that. Okay, good. So this is the situational audience analysis. And the frame of mind that the audience has is very important too, whether or not they're in favor of, opposed to, a person, a policy. This is especially true in persuasive speaking. So when we get to our speech 3 unit, think about your topic. And just like we were talking about a gift, if you want to know if your audience would like your topic, you need to ask us, do you feel that marijuana should be legalized in all 50 states? That's a pretty easy yes or no question, or don't know. You can offer don't know as an option, but you can send that little questionnaire out, and then you have some evidence you can use. And that's one of your research citations too, if you do a audience survey. It can't be all your research, but it can be one of them. Okay? Or any controversial topic. I hope you'll pick controversial topics for your persuasive speeches. We have lots of them in our world. We have problems and solutions that you can talk about, but you need to know how your audience feels about it. What are their attitudes about your speech? And here's a speech adapting to audience attitudes. Let's listen and we'll talk.
Those of you who oppose reparations believe they will cost too much. That's a real concern, especially with the growing national deficit. But we need to put the cost into perspective. According to a recent article in the New York Times, a moderate reparations plan would cost $3 trillion. That's a ton of money, I know. But it's money that you likely wouldn't have to pay. We'd stretch it out over time. If we raise taxes slightly on only the richest Americans, those with wealth above 30 million, we could cover that $3 trillion in a decade. Think of it. In 10 years, by only taxing the super rich, we could dramatically lessen the wealth gap that has held Black communities back for generations.
Wow, okay, so the topic was reparations, right? And she knew that some of the audience opposed them. For what reason? Why did she say people would oppose reparations? What are people afraid of?
Taxes being raised.
Yeah, taxes being raised, that it's going to cost us money. Who said that? In addition to Courtney was trying to say it. Who said that? Jenny. Okay, good. Thanks, Jenny. Good. Yeah. Yeah, they're afraid it's going to cost them money. So she knew that because she had done a survey and she adapted to those attitudes, and she was trying to think of the opposition that the audience was going to give her and answer that. And she even said something in there, $3 trillion. She said, I admit that is a lot of money, Because that's the first thought I have when I hear $3 trillion. I go, that's an incredible amount of money, right? Unless you're David Tepper and you own the Carolina Panthers, but something like that. It's still a lot of money for most people. So she tried to make a plan. This was a problem solution speech. It sounds like to me. I haven't heard the whole speech, but it sounds like that. She's talking about the problem of reparations are due to former families of enslaved people. And then she was talking about a solution, how we can get that money and distribute it appropriately without changing my lifestyle at all. And that's why I like that, because it wouldn't change anything for me. I'm not one of the super rich. Okay. So yeah, that you would have some opposition to that still, just on principle, but at least she's trying to adapt to the audience attitudes. And that's what that was all about. So when you're getting audience information, you can ask what we call fixed alternative, scale questions, or open-ended questions. You might know what these are. You've probably taken surveys in classes here at Newberry and whatnot. Especially if you were a first-year student, you took a couple of surveys which had a bunch of scale questions on them. And so you can do that in here too and see how you can use them. Here's a fixed alternative question. I like the way this person gives this option at the bottom here, not sure, because that tells you as a speaker, okay, I've got to make sure, if 4 people say that, even if one says it, you probably have to, in this small of an audience, even if one person says it, you probably have to really define the topic for us. And that's a really good public speaking technique too, to define terms for your audience. We discussed this in class briefly the other day, but that's fixed alternative question. You give us a multiple choice. Good way to do a survey. Second is a scale. How often do you believe state legislatures engage? Just what are your attitudes about it? And 3 might be neutral. You might even put neutral here up on top so audience knows if they don't know, they should check the middle one. But this person wants to know their beliefs. Now that you know what it is, how often. Okay, so this is a scale question. You can do that. And you can write that out in your question on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest or something like that. Good. And then you could have open-ended questions too. These are a little tougher for surveys because people are less likely to answer them. They take more time. I mean, that's just my honest response to that. But this could be a good interview question if you want to peer testimony. Y'all can email each other too, or maybe some of you know each other's numbers or text each other, whatever. You can also not ask someone in this class, but another Newberry College student who you know real well. Who do you think should set the boundaries of congressional districts? Okay, good. Or some other option. Well, it's open-ended, but it's still kind of multiple choice, which is good. All right, so you can use any of those, and then you use them in your speech.
I learned from my class survey that those of you who object to reparations cite 2 main reasons. First, you believe that the program would cost too much. Second, you think reparations wouldn't accomplish what they're designed to accomplish.
So what she has to do now is answer those questions in her speech, and that's what she's going to continue to do. We're not going to watch the rest of it, but you get the idea. I wish we had seen this one before the other one because it seems to make sense to have that one earlier. Okay. So when you adapt to your audience before a speech, you assess how the audience will respond. You adjust to make the speech clear and convincing. And when you're adapting during your speech, you adjust for unexpected circumstances and watch for feedback. If you see people do a lot of this during your speech, now this is only when you're doing a speech live. You can't do this for your recorded speeches, obviously. But if you see somebody go like this or go shaking their heads or whatever, you may want to adapt right there. This is when you're a more experienced speaker and you can really read your audience and see, but just watch for their feedback. If people are crossing their arms a lot, that usually means that they're not really liking what you're saying. Sometimes it just means their hands are cold and they want to warm them up. But other times it means that they're really not liking what you're saying. So you want to try and think about those kinds of things with your audience. All right. Let's do a little exercise, then we're going to get to your quiz for today. It's 10:15. We're going to go over homework as well. You see A, B, and C on the board here, right? Everybody look at these. And we won't have a question for everybody to answer. So I want to encourage everybody who has not participated to participate. And if you've already participated, try again. If you were going to do a speech with this specific purpose in letter A, what information would you need to know about your audience, demographic or situationally? What would you need to know from your audience to make it a really more effective speech about your audience? Who wants to answer for A? What are some factors you need to know? 4 steps they can take so they can protect their dorm rooms against burglaries. What do you need to know about your audience before you write this speech?
Hey,
They're college students,
Okay, Deani, say yours again.
like the age, like are they college students?
Good. And Faith, what were you going to say?
I was saying the same thing, but also like the gender.
Okay, good. Okay, terrific. What's the gender breakdown? Good. What about B? 3 principles of aerodynamics that allow an airplane to fly. What do you need to know about your audience before you write this speech?
Have they ever been on an airplane?
Okay, that's probably a good thing, sure, because that gives you some experience. Anything else? Maybe what their educational background in aerodynamics is. I don't know a whole lot about that because I've never studied it, right? What do they already know about the topic? You might have some specific questions, like the gerrymandering one. You may have some specific questions with terms to ask them if they've ever heard of these. So yeah, you need to know the age range of your audience too, because if you're talking to, airplanes are fascinating to young children. If you're in elementary school, it's a totally different speech than if you're in a college classroom, right? So you want to try and think about these things. Okay, letter C.
If they have any knowledge on eating disorders.
Cami, I love the way you said that because you didn't say whether or not they have an eating disorder. That's probably sensitive information that somebody wouldn't want to share. But knowledge is a great question to ask. Do you know what yeah, very good. You might also want to find out statistics on our campus or in South Carolina or of people in your age group in a state or something about eating disorders. Yeah, those kinds of things. And that's research you can do. But from the audience, you might want to find out if they have knowledge on it. Good, Cami. What about D here, E and F? Look at these. Some of you look at F now, some of you look at E, and the others look at D, and someone answer D after you read it. What do you want to know about your audience before you write speech D? About Social Security as a problem and you're proposing a solution. Anybody have an idea? What should you know about your audience before you do speech D? Or maybe we'll come back to that one. Think about it for a minute. What about E? Anybody have any thoughts on E? What should you know about your audience before you do a speech about abolishing capital punishment? Real big one here. What do you need to know before you persuade us that capital punishment should be abolished? What should you know about us before you go on with that speech?
You need to know their stance on the subject. If
Absolutely.
they agree or disagree with it.
Of course, Ginny. Yes. You have to know if they already agree with you. You can't go into that speech and say, here's why we should abolish it. And you go in like they are all against you. Don't do that because some people might agree with you. Now, chances are, even in an audience of 12 like this, you may have an audience that is mixed, that some would agree with you, some don't. Some maybe don't know how they feel. And that's your target audience. That's your most important group of audience members. Because it's unlikely in a 5-minute speech you're going to change someone's opinion. For people who already agree with you, you're reinforcing those existing beliefs, which is great. But the ones you really want to capture are those who don't quite know how they feel about capital punishment. And those would be the questions you want to ask. Are you for, against, or you don't know how you feel about capital punishment? If you get a lot of don't knows, you're in great shape. And you're fine the other way too. But if everybody is against you, you've got to work a little harder and word things a little differently. And you say that. In my class survey that I just took last week, I found that 11 out of 12 of the audience members, then you just say that. All right. What about F? What should you know about your audience before you persuade us to participate in intramurals?
If they have a sports background.
Good, Sam. Yes, excellent. What else? Anything else you might want to know about us? Maybe if anybody has any physical limitations or something like that. Yeah, I mean, just good. Okay, good. But if you find out that someone does have physical limitations, then you adapt your speech and you say, and for those of you who aren't able to participate on the field, here's how you can participate. That's still participating in them, right? Maybe they help somehow. Absolutely. Scorekeeping, whatever. So you can do that. And that's important, really important that you do that for inclusivity in your audience. All right, back to D. Anybody think about D? Any factors you need to know for that? Probably the age is the most important one, right? Because if you're talking to a group of college students, 18 to 24, it's a different speech than if you're talking to people who are 50s and 60s. Okay, so good. All right, so that's the that's the end of that. I hope that these ideas that we've shared today about audience analysis and supporting materials will help you as you move through your planning. Remember, you want to plan your speech with the audience at the center, keep your purpose clear, and that's what's going to lead to successful speaking. So you all have info researches speeches coming up. You've got to choose the appropriate supporting materials and give us a reason to listen. Supporting materials of your examples, your statistics, your testimonies, give your speech substance. Otherwise, you have a bunch of unsubstantiated claims. You substantiate them, you make us believe you by saying where you got your information, how recent it is, who wrote it, what their qualifications are. Just take your time and just make it sound interesting. You know, an article I read that was by, start like that if you want to. You could say the person's name. You could say Ginny Bass, who's a noted author in psychotherapy, wrote an article that was published in, you know, something like that. Ginny, I just gave you a lot of credit. Okay, anyway, yeah, I don't know if you did or not, but okay. But vary your sources and cite them completely. Audience analysis is necessary to help you understand to whom you're speaking and to keep the audience at the center. You got to know our needs, our wants, our desires, and choose your supporting materials ethically. And vary your supporting materials. Use some facts, use some statistics, use some testimonies. Don't use all one or the other. Any questions over anything we covered today? All right, your quiz is going to open up in 2 minutes. Before it opens, and you don't have to stay on camera, just do that. If anybody wants to stay on camera, I'll hang out if you have questions about upcoming assignments. And I just want to make sure that you get those done. Chapter 6 and 8 quiz, you have 5 minutes or 4 minutes once it's open. You'll see the timer. It's due at 10:35 today, so you need to take it right now. You can take it before 10:30 though. Watch all classmates' speeches before tomorrow in the discussion forum. It's going to take you probably an hour and a half or so to do that. Prepare your oral response for the assigned classmate. If you forgot who that was, stick around after your quiz and I'll tell you. And respond to at least 2 classmates in the discussion forum who you're not responding to in class. And if you want to respond to all of them, great. You don't get credit for forum entries after 9 a.m. tomorrow. After we start class tomorrow, forum's closed. Okay? So make sure you do that, and you can add into speech responses tomorrow. Anybody have any other questions?
We just type up those responses, right?
You don't even have to type them. You're not turning them in. You just take notes to share orally in class from that PowerPoint, and you type the responses in the forum to the other classmates. Yes. Good clarification, Ginny. All right, everybody. Then I'll see you for a review tomorrow, and we'll also talk. We didn't get to talk about your peer evaluation essay today, but we'll do that tomorrow after we talk about speeches. All right, then go take your quiz. If anybody has any questions, I'll hang out in the meeting for a little while till you're all gone. Take care. Talk to you soon.